Tonight we will be in Matthew chapter 7. So the Sermon on the Mount is Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. So we're in the last third of this sermon. And we will be looking at verses 1 through 6. And this section we'll be looking at as part of the last half or the first half of chapter 7. And it's all about one thing. It's all about how do we help others? How do we do good into the lives of other people? That's what it's all about. It's always been a little challenging for me, this section, because it seemed kind of haphazard how certain things fit together. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, probably the next time. So this is part one of how to help others or helping other people. And then we'll look at part two, which will take us, verses 7 through the rest of that part of the passage. So this section is, again, like most of the Sermon on the Mount, to most of us, is pretty familiar territory. So when you talk about here, we're talking about judges, we're talking about specks of dust and logs in people's eyes, and we're talking about holy things and pearls and dogs and swines, and you go, what in the world do these things have in common? And amazingly, these are images that Jesus is presenting to us to teach us how to lovingly help other people. That's the primary teaching in this section. So in chapter 5, Jesus taught that the righteousness of the kingdom of the heavens is primarily about learning how to love people, how to love all kinds of people, good and the bad, the righteous and the unrighteous, in the way that the Father loves. That's what it says, right? The Father causes the sun to shine on the good and the evil, and the rain to fall on the righteous and the unrighteous. And if you want to be complete, perfect, then you have to love like the way the Father loves. That's pretty much the whole chapter 5. That's what it's all about. The Pharisees were saying, as long as you did things on the outside and looked good on the outside, then you were keeping the law. You were satisfying what was needed to be righteous. And Jesus saying, sorry, wrong, that doesn't cut it. And he says, but I say to you, and he went through example after example. And then we come to chapter 6, and we find here that Jesus is telling us that in order to be able to love people that way, which demands ruthlessly, and I use that phrase, ruthlessly eliminating anger from our lives, lust from our lives, divorce, manipulating people, eliminating vengeance from our lives, and ultimately there in the last, eliminating hatred from our lives. In order to do that, we need to have our security firmly rooted in God and what He thinks of us, not what other people think about us or in the stuff that we possess. We can't have our security rooted in those things. So if we're going to love others like the Heavenly Father, we just can't be preoccupied with what those other people are thinking about us, so that we're not operating just in order to gain their approval. Because in a sense, when we do that, what we're doing is we're viewing people as existing in order to help me to do what I want, which is completely backwards. We exist to serve other people. That's what God created us, all of us, one another, is to love and serve other people freely, no matter who they are. And also we need to be secure in the love of the Father for us, that he is a good Father who is going to faithfully care for us and take care of our needs. So we don't have to live in fear. We don't have to live in worry. He cares for the birds and the flowers, and how much more is he going to care for us? And we have to be assured of that, because he wants us to be secure. That's the kind of heart attitude that he wants us to have, that everything is okay because he is going to take care of us. And so in a sense, we can be secure and as carefree as the birds of the air and the flowers of the fields. That's chapter 6. Now we come to chapter 7 here, and I said, like in this chapter, the first half is Jesus giving us insight in how we can lovingly help other people as the Father lovingly helps us. So here he's giving us really the fundamental way to view other people that is essential to be able to actually help others. This is kind of practical, what he's going to say here. And as he did in chapter 5, he tells, we're going to see here that there's an old way, the Pharisee style of righteousness, and then there's Jesus' new kingdom way. And he's going to show us that. So let's jump right in. This is on that wonderful topic of judging. And he says in verse 1 and 2, first, don't judge others. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Jesus is stating this is the way the world works. This is reality. This is how things work. So the first thing we need to look at is the critical word here is the word judge. And the Greek word that is used is the word krino, or krino. I don't know how exactly they would have said it, but krino, and it's a verb. And it's a word that carries the sense of separating, of selecting, of choosing, of determining. And it implies that you are in a superior position to be able to pronounce judgment, to do these things of selecting and choosing and determining. And it's often viewed with a look to condemnation, to condemning, judging, to condemn the actions or behaviors of another person. Now, this is something I picked up at the retreat a couple weeks ago that I should have automatically just known that. But, Jesus did not speak Greek, or that was not his main language. When he's preaching this sermon, he's not speaking Greek, he's speaking Aramaic. But Matthew writes the gospel in Greek. So we're reading a translation.
Wow. Okay. Nice.
So it's important, I never thought, I need to go and look up. So I'm doing AI. Well, what's the Aramaic word for judge? Because that's the word Jesus would have actually spoken. And the Aramaic word is the word dan, or done, and it's very closely related to Hebrew. And it's used to describe both structural legal judgment and the interpersonal act of judging or criticizing another person. So again, it has that kind of negative edge on it of judging with that view to criticizing or condemning. And what Jesus is saying here, and he's talking here, and we need to really qualify it, he's not talking about the judge who's down at the Superior Court in his job, in a criminal case or civil cases, making judgments. And that's not what he's talking about. I mean, the Old Testament had judges, people that did that. Moses was a judge. He's not talking about that kind of legal kind of judge. He's talking about interpersonal, how you relate to other people in your day-to-day life, people in your family, people that you work with, people you come in contact with. How do you view them? And he's saying you do not judge them, because there's a boomerang effect with judgment. Because when you judge somebody else, that judgment is going to come back to you. This is what the Hindus would call karma. I mean, it's going to come back to you, because what you're doing when you judge somebody, you have established a standard, and it's your personal standard that you have determined that this other person needs to live or act or do something according to this standard that you have. And the boomerang effect is that, well, you're going to be judged by that standard that you've set. It's going to come back on you. So how you treat other people, it's the old simple thing. When you point your finger, you got three fingers pointing back at you. You're going to be on that receiving. It's a two-way street. So the standard that you use to judge others will be used to judge you. And I don't think he's primarily talking here about how God's going to judge you. God could do that. God could just say, hey, I'm just going to judge you by the standard that you set for the way you judged other people. Then it wouldn't go very well for us. Because we don't live up to our own standards. And Paul uses that argument in Romans when he talks about the Jews. Well, you think you're so self-righteous because, of the Gentiles. And he says, well, do you do this? Yeah. Do you do this? Well, yeah. Do you do this? You're just as guilty as the Gentiles. And so we have to really remind ourselves, that the standard you use to judge others will be the standard that's used to judge you by other people. And we see this in the world today. A lot of the non-Christian world out there, they know how Christians are supposed to be. They know what Jesus taught about loving other people and how you're supposed to treat other people and everything. They just choose not to, to buy into it so much, but they know it. And so when they see the Christians not living up to the standard that they have set for themselves, that they're supposed to be, they really come back on you. Well, and we'll get more into that. So I don't go too far into that right now, but Jesus is going to talk a little bit more about that. So what do you do? What does Jesus say? So that's the old way, judging people, judging people. Was a very Pharisaical thing to do. They're constantly putting themselves in a superior position, setting themselves on the bar as the judge, and looking down on others. And one author calls this condemnation engineering or shame engineering. It's how you use those things to manipulate people to get what you want. And so Jesus says here, and this is one of the strongest evidence that Jesus really had a sense of humor. It's almost like he's doing a stand-up comedy thing here right now. Why do you look at the speck, the little piece of dust in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log or the beam in your own eye? So you really have to visualize that. Jesus was a carpenter, right? He knew what a beam was. He knew what a log was. And to have it coming out of your eye is so exaggerated and so ridiculous. But that's what he's saying. He's saying, you're like someone who's got this log in your eye, except you're totally unaware of it. It's a blind spot. You've got this huge problem, this huge log, and this is a little parable. He's talking in parable kind of language. And you're going up with this big log in your eye, and you're trying to get up close to somebody to say, let me get that little piece of dust and pick it out of your eye while you're with this log, whacking them in the side of the head back and forth. You're not helping. That's the picture that he's given us here. You're just dangerous. You're just going around whacking people left and right, but you're totally oblivious and not aware of this, what you're doing. So, it's really is hilarious. So he says, you hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye. Duh. And then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your... You can get close enough to be able to help the other person. So again, see, this is how are you going to help somebody? You're trying to help them get whatever little problems in their life you're wanting to help. But you got this huge problem in your own life that is destructive, that's preventing you from being able to really see what the problem is of somebody else, or to get close enough to be able to help somebody. So he's saying, don't worry about someone else's speck of dust in there. Don't worry about that. Admit that you've got a log in your eye, which in other words is saying, to admit that is to humble yourself, examine your own self. Don't think of yourself as someone who's superior. The answer man. Now, this is a huge problem for pastors, because they get put up into this position that they are the answer man. Everybody's coming to them for answers. And when you're in that kind of position, and you're related to that way by other people, after a while you start believing. You start thinking, well, yeah, you don't consciously say I'm better than it, but you develop this attitude that, well, I know because everybody's coming to me. So it's a real temptation and a problem for pastors to not fall into that trap, because counselors who have a log coming out of their eye, they don't help people. They only hurt people. And so the bottom line that Jesus is saying here, it's not complicated. It's not some theological mystery here. He said, deal with your own problems before you try to correct somebody else. Don't be sticking your nose in somebody's face when you have got these issues going on in your own life that you haven't faced up to. Now that leads us to the second part of this section, which is one of the, I believe, most misunderstood and misinterpreted passages in the New Testament. And it's all about the dogs and the pigs and the pearls and the holy things. He says in verse 4, do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Okay, so right off the bat, this sounds like, wait a minute, Jesus, you just said don't judge other people. And now you're calling other people dogs and pigs, and we got to judge them so that we don't give them this good stuff that we have, because they might hurt them or something. Which is in direct contrast and contradiction to what Jesus has just said. And it goes against pretty much everything Jesus' whole ministry was about. Because if that's the case, then God is the most guilty person of putting their pearls before swine. He gave us the greatest pearl there was. They gave us his own son. So I just said, this is not what Jesus is talking about. This is not what Jesus is talking about. People will interpret this and say, well, now Jesus is saying, yeah, but you don't want to go overboard. You got to be discriminating. You got to be discerning about who you share your faith with, who you help out, because they might take advantage of you. They might misuse this. So you got to be careful. And I'm not saying that there isn't a place where we need to be discerning about that sort of thing, but that's not what Jesus is talking about, I don't believe. This is a parable. This is a little parable that Jesus is giving us here. And what he is doing, he's giving us another picture of a person with a log in their eye, which was just this exaggerated illustration of somebody with a log in their eye trying to help somebody with a speck in their eye. And it's the same thing. This is the attitude of someone who sees themselves as superior, the person with the answers, who are trying to mask their own problems and insecurities with this "I'm better than you" attitude. And they go about and they try to force feed their answers. And in the parable, your holy things. Well, what's a holy thing? Well, a Bible is a holy thing. Or pearls. You try to force feed these to, animals. And it's inappropriate to these animals because they don't eat books, they don't eat pearls. They're not going to get nourished. They're not going to benefit by having somebody try to feed them pearls and Bibles, because they can't eat them. They're going to choke on them. What they need is real food, this real spiritual nourishment that will be able to minister and help them with their situation, their problems in their life. That's what they need. So what happens then, and we've all experienced this, and it happens all the time, when somebody tries to force their views on you, how do you generally react to that or respond to that?
Rebellion.
Yeah, it's like, it's, the used car salesman that get you in, and you can't get away, That's a common example, but it's the pastor sets down, this is what you need to do. You need to do this, and need to do this, and need to do this. And that log is flying around and hitting you in the head the whole time. And it's not really getting to the problem that you have. That's trying to feed pearls and Bibles to pigs and dogs. And Jesus says too, it's interesting because he says, uses the word here, do not the word is cast, or the throw. Here it's translated do not give, but it's this idea of casting or throwing, which, first of all, is very impersonal. It's has an element of uncaring or actually disdain for the who you're giving your pearls and your holy things to. There's a little interest into actually trying to find out, well, what do the dogs and the pigs really need or want? Which goes back to verses 1 and 2 in this chapter 7. says, if you judge others, which means you're looking down on them, you're approaching them with a superior attitude, a condemning attitude, that it's going to boomerang back on you, because the pigs and the dogs, what do? They want food. And the pearls and the books aren't going to do it, but you look pretty tasty. And so they attack you and tear you to pieces. In other words, the boomerang, you get judged by. And so Jesus is saying, I believe he's saying the same thing here as he said in the first part of this passage. And again, it's that whole attitude of having whether it's conscious or unconscious attitude of, I know better, I am somehow better than, I'm superior to other people. There's a lot of people in this world that I can think of that I'm superior to. It's because of either their economic status or their educational level or those kinds of things. And Jesus is saying, you got to get that out of your system. You've got to ruthlessly eliminate judging from your system. So here's my just imagine experiment. Can you imagine a world where people in their interpersonal relationships actually refuse to judge others? Can you imagine what the world would be like if that was the case? Well, that's the seeing the logs in our own eye. Seeing the logs in our own eye. You know, we see that log, and I have to deal with my own issues and problems before I, can help somebody else. And then can you imagine asking someone else, could you point out any logs that I have in my eyes that I don't see? Do I have any blind spots that, I know you're too polite to tell me, but I'm asking, could you help me out? Just ask your wife or your husband. I'm sure, first of all, that might be hard, but and do you think the world would be a better place if judging others was a rare thing? Well, the answer, of course, is yeah, it would be, So I'm going to close it right there. So I don't know if this has raised any questions, because I know this is a very different look at that, especially that thing with the dogs and the pigs. And so I'd be really interested, curious to see, how that comes across. So I'll leave it there, and some of these questions that I had here maybe spark some discussion too. So there you go. And then the next part in here, again, it's unusual because it's usually interpreted as being about prayer. And I don't think it's about prayer primarily. I think it's about how do you help other people. And that's where Jesus actually gives us the solution. This is more of the old way, the judging way. And the next one he's going to tell us, well, how do you get that speck out of a person's eye? How do you truly give the dogs and the people that you look down on, how do you actually give them what they need? And that's what the next section is. You can read it if you want to know what it is, but